So there's a story that on Shabbat, there was a rabbi who told his congregation, he looked out, as I'm looking out now, and he said, "Next week my sermon will be all about the sin of lying. And to help you understand it better, I would like you all to read Leviticus chapter 28 before next week." The following Shabbat, at the start of his sermon, the rabbi looked out over the congregation and he said, "How many of you have read Leviticus 28, just as I asked you to do last week?" And of course, you can imagine everybody in the congregation raised their hand. The rabbi smiled, looked at them and said, "Leviticus only has 27 chapters. I will now proceed with my sermon on the sin of lying." The prophet Jeremiah preached many a sermon about lying and about not following God's ways. So as I explained before, the Haftarah, that secondary reading, comes right from what we read before from Jeremiah. And from Jeremiah's beginning as a prophet, he witnessed some pretty dark times in history. He witnessed the downfall of the Assyrian Empire, the death of Josiah, the destruction of the Jewish state by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, and the carrying away of most of the people into captivity to Babylon. Jeremiah himself was taken to Egypt by fugitive Judeans, where, according to legend, he later died. We're now in an interesting time in the traditional Jewish calendar. This period of time historically is known as the 3 weeks, and it goes from now and it goes through the 9th day of the month of Av, which is actually a day of mourning for Jews. This is the darkest and saddest time on the traditional Jewish calendar. It's a time that commemorates the past history when both of the temples in Jerusalem were destroyed during this 3-week span, along with unimaginable suffering and tragedy and some of the worst pogroms against the Jewish people throughout history. The Jeremiah passage that we read is also connected to very dark times. The beginning of this passage in Jeremiah started with Jeremiah's lineage. These are the words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiyahu of the Kohanim. It continues to tell us how he became a prophet. God tells Jeremiah, "Before I formed you in the belly, I knew you. And before you emerged from the womb, I appointed you to be a prophet." Jeremiah says to God, "I don't know how to speak, for I am but a youth." "Don't say I am a youth," replies God, "for wherever I will send you, you will go. Whatever I command you, you will speak. Don't be afraid of them, for I am with you to protect you. See, I have appointed you today over nations and over kingdoms, to uproot, to crush, to build, and to plant." Then God gives him the prophecy of the impending devastation of Judah and tells Jeremiah that he should go out and warn the Jewish people. This section of Jeremiah, though, ends on a positive note. God remembers that we did follow God into the desert. We did trust in God. And the idea behind that was that if we return to God, if we return to the commandments of the Torah, that God would bring the people back to Jerusalem and accept them with open arms. Jeremiah lived in a time of great darkness. He lived at a time when the Jewish people were at an all-time spiritual low. He himself was taunted regularly because of his pedigree, as his great-grandmother was a woman named Rachav, who was a Gentile convert. It didn't matter that she was a great woman who helped the Jewish people in the conquest of the Holy Land, others still taunted him because of her. He had all the cards stacked against him, and yet he brought about change through the darkness in which he lived. We've had many great prophets and leaders in our tradition. Some affected the world from a place of great light, like Moses. Moses was given the gift of being able to present great miracles to the people, and the people experienced true revelation under Moses' leadership, with so much light that the Jewish people were taken by the greatness of the moment. Of course, they were good when the miracles happened, but when the miracles ceased, they acted out. They built the golden calf. They revolted against Moses. They complained about the food they didn't have in the desert. They got scared. And when they got scared, they turned away from God. The light that Moses was able to show them affected them, but that light was not able to change them. However, Pinchas, who is the star of this week's Torah portion, about whom Kevin spoke on Friday evening, like Jeremiah, was coming from a place of darkness. Pinchas, we learn, was also taunted because of his family. His mother was one of Jethro's daughter. Jethro was a Midianite priest. And he came to the forefront in a very low and dark time. His actions, while quite dramatic and controversial, caused the Jewish people to repent and change. And if you're not familiar with the story of Pinchas, there was a great plague which happened just as the Israelite men had discovered the Midianite women, and tens of thousands of them became infected with the plague. And Pinchas, when he saw one of the women walking into the tent of one of the elders, followed them and drove a spear through both of their hearts. Now, his actions were dramatic, his actions were violent, but the plague stopped, and the people repented. The change that he brought about was real and was everlasting, and his reward was an eternal one that he and all of his descendants would become priests. Through the pairing of this week's story of Jeremiah with the story of Pinchas in our scriptural Torah reading, God is trying to tell us how to approach times of darkness, and how specifically we, in this darkness, can bring an everlasting change and light to our world. The first thing that we have to know is that we are worthy of bringing about that change. We might think, as did Jeremiah, who am I to make a difference? The whole world looks down at me. But we remember that God answered Jeremiah and said, you are from a nation of priests. You are holy and worthy. The next thing is that we need to remember that all of us were handpicked by God for this task. Before I formed you in the belly, I knew you, God said to Jeremiah. We can't say, I am a youth, without the wherewithal to withstand the world's negativity. We can do it. Don't be afraid, for I am with you, God said to Jeremiah. The lesson for us is that specifically from within the darkness, we are able to do the most good. Remember the almond tree from Jeremiah's prophecy. Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Jeremiah, what do you see? And I said, I see a branch of an almond tree. And then the Lord said to me, you have seen well, for I am watching to perform my word. If you've been to Israel at the end of the winter, the beginning of the springtime, you would notice that almond trees are the first trees to blossom, but they're the last trees to bear fruit. This prophecy uses a play on words that carries vital truth for all humanity. The Hebrew word for almond is shaked. Shaked is also one form of the Hebrew verb to watch. By seeing the almond branch, God assured Jeremiah that God is watching over his word to bring it to pass, no matter the passage of time. You and I are living in a world that seems very dark at times these days. Some mornings it is very hard to get up, to read the news on our phone or in that old-fashioned thing that gets delivered to our door, the paper, or to watch the TV and to see what's happening to our country, to our world. It's easy to give up hope. It's easy to feel like all is lost. But then we need to remember Jeremiah and Pinchas, two individuals who felt the same way, two individuals who dug deep to bring light to a darkened world. That's our challenge. God has called to each of us to respond to the darkness by spreading some light. There are blossoms on that almond tree, and it will bear fruit if each of us together brings that light that dwells inside of us to make it happen. Amen.